First thing is public comments. Gordon, I think you're our only public person here if you want to make a. There's no other comment, nobody else from the public. And I try to promote the meeting on Facebook too. I thought we got a lot of views of it, but I thought we'd get people.
Jen
Maybe
Golds
they'll-
is going to join us later, right?
I think so. Yeah, she's gonna
Thank
be.
you.
And Jennifer, somebody's trying to connect via audio on a phone. That could be Barbara. I think sometimes she jumps in on the audio. But anyways, in light of no public comment, we'll move on to approval of minutes. The agenda says December 9th, and I apologize, that was my mistake. December 9th was the meeting that we didn't have a quorum, so it should say December 17th. And those are the minutes that Josh sent out to us.
The minutes I have here indicate December 17th.
Right. The agenda said December 9th, and
Oh.
that was me. I put the wrong date in there.
I don't have any comments.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes, Harry.
Okay, second.
I'll second it, Steve.
Okay, Steve. Roll call, Josh?
Gina,
Yes.
Carlton,
Yes,
Harry,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Jean,
Yes,
Bill. Bill, you're on mute.
Bill, you need.
Okay, now, yes, yes.
Thank you. All right, thank you. The motion was approved.
Okay, great. Moving on to the financial reports that were sent out.
mm-hmm,
Oops, I'm not. What did I hit? Okay, I hit the wrong thing here.
I
Okay,
Actually, I apologize. I know that we just went through the approving of the minutes.
Yep.
One thing I did notice just now was that my name is not on the members present.
oh, okay,
I'll get you on there.
Great, thanks.
sounds good. Let me. I just want to check one thing on the minutes too. Okay, okay.
good catch.
Any, jumping on to the financial reports? Any questions or comments?
Do we seem to have more money than we thought we do? We have $3,639,993.43 as of December 31st in cash. Is that right?
I'm just jumping over to it. I didn't print it out. Just hold on. Yeah, that could have Bill, it could have income that was put in that was received after the last time.
That's
See.
Right,
approximately right. Because if you go through the asset list, there's cash, but there's also reserves against that cash, okay? So our actually amount that we have to spend is a little bit less than that.
Oh, because the asset total here says 4 million. When we add up these real estate tax additions, the $904 and 3,927 and then another 369, it says $4,025,112 total asset,
Mhm.
whatever that means.
right. I think that amount is about right. And I say about because I don't know exactly what's in there, but it sounds about right looking at that.
can I ask?
You can ask whatever you'd like, Jean.
Okay, because I guess, learning what these are. I'm assuming those are dates. I don't know. Under object,
Well, that's the accounting numbers. That's the.
those are the
account-
accounting number?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
'Cause
Right.
just didn't know. It says 2019, 126. Is that like left over from 2019?
No,
Oh,
that's
you
money
look-
that's money that's come in that people have paid back taxes.
Oh, okay. All
So
right.
for each of those years, and you can see the 2021 is huge because we've had 2 tax periods already.
Yeah.
Which
Oh,
sheet are you
all right.
looking on? Which sheet are you looking on? Help me.
The one that
Um,
says
The
balance sheet.
balance sheet.
Yeah.
I,
Okay,
I'm still trying to learn how to read these. I just,
well.
I don't
the,
think
Now
we're
I-
supposed to learn how to read them.
what was
Right,
that,
there.
Bill?
I don't think we're supposed to know how to read.
I don't
that's
think
why it
they're
was
the
like-
easiest to read. I look at it every month and it's like, oh yeah, I understand that. Then come the next month, I'm like, well, what's that again?
Yeah. Well, that's what, that one, now, next month I'll ask you about one of the other ones, so.
Okay, well, you can ask more than one question
Oh, I
tonight.
have no idea if I have a question on one.
Oh,
Well,
Okay.
I think it's very confusing to me, and if there's some place that we had a place that said available cash or available funds, because a lot of, down in the lower part, liabilities, there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes against that number. So,
Well, at the end, C, it says fund balance total, 3,639,000.
well, then.
right, I
okay.
believe,
Yeah,
right, I believe we have roughly 3.5 million
Yeah.
in the account. So that would be about right. That's what we have to spend.
And we know, just so we are aware of that, we know that that's drawing interest, correct? Because it has an interest.
Correct.
income. And that's good because there's a sheet here that the state put out about how we should be looking at the CP2 form, that the financial department takes care of it, but they just recommend that we make sure we see that form.
Okay, and I do get a copy of that. I can go back to the last one I got and send it out to everybody.
No, my only point was to make sure we get it.
Yeah. It's submitted to the state and actually I have to pull it out because I need to start the annual report for the town report. And I take figures from that I put into the annual report, so I'll be pulling it out soon.
So Gina, the only other thing is, do you want me to go over the admin account at this point since Tony's not online?
Sure. One of the things we have further on in the agenda under new business is the admin budget account. We had talked at the last meeting, after we voted to pay for the churches, congregational churches deed restriction out of our admin account,
mhm.
that we questioned if we'd really have enough money and how much we would have. So if we have a motion to take that out of order and we can discuss it right now while we're on the finance part.
So moved.
Carlton moved it.
Okay, Carl moved it. Second,
Somebody please.
A second, I'll
second for-
second.
okay, Bill seconded. Josh, roll call.
I'm doing just one here. All
Yeah.
right. Gina,
Yes.
Carlton,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
Jean,
Yes,
Harry,
Yes.
Bill,
Yes,
Steve.
Yes again.
Thank you. Motion was approved.
Great, thank you. Carlton, did you see my message to send that form over to Josh?
It's on-
that chart
I'm
that you
sharing it
wrote?
right now. I'm sharing it right now.
Oh, okay, great.
So because we voted last meeting the $6,500 for the church, for the historic preservation work, and everybody was not sure about how much money we had actually in the admin account. So I did a cost to complete. And what I did, the data that we just accepted through, that should be through 12/31. Okay, so this is as of the end of December. What the budget we had in part-time wages was $2,000. We had spent about 453. I believe this is correct. Yeah, we had spent about 453 through the end of December. The available money budget is consistent with what Tony provided to us. What I did was take the spend rate. I just simply took the 6 months and divided into the money, and we're spending about $75 a month. And when I take the 75 times whatever the rate is, it comes out to another 453. So the end of year cost expectation, and this is primarily Josh's budget, it comes out to be that we have about $1,000 left over in that account. And then I did the same thing with Jennifer Goldson's contract. And through December, they had spent about, I hope this is the right one. Anyway, the bottom line is that her contract's ended in May, so I multiplied her average spend rate by 5 months left in her budget year. And that comes up with an expenditure balance of about 6,000 if she spent at that rate. And then the admin account preservation was, we had a budget of other things, 3,500, and we said we would spend 6,500, and so that account would go be overspent by that amount. And then the admin dues, which we'll talk about a little later today, that was budgeted for 3,500, and it came in at 2,875. So there's an excess of about $625 in that. If I look at the projected, if I use that math and project out, that math, I find that based on the adjusted, especially with Jennifer Goldson, Jen Goldson's thing, account, we would have about 29,000 spent, gives us a projected balance of $4,700. So this is ballpark, but the bottom line is, I think we're in good shape with the administrative account based on the December budget numbers that Tony provided to us. And the two costs in green here are in fact fixed costs because of what commitments, well, we'll make one vote tonight. So for Jennifer Goldson, she can spend a little more than her average rate. And I suspect that this next month, based on the public forum that we have to hold, that may be eroded a little bit more. But anyway, we're in good shape with that budget. That's the bottom line I wanted to let people know.
That's good. Thank you, Carlton. Thank
Any
you for
questions?
checking into that. Anybody have any questions on that? Okay, I just have not a question on that, but I was actually poking around the town's website for committees, trying to, I have something in the oven and my timer is going to beep in a second, but hold on 1 second. Let me just shut it off so it doesn't. Okay, sorry about that. I was poking around the town's webpage looking to see members of another committee, and I started looking at the blurb for the CPC, and I didn't realize this. And it says the Community Preservation Committee may include in its recommendation to the town council a recommendation to set aside for later spending funds, blah, 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 blah. Then it says the committee may recommend to the town council that funds be borrowed and repaid with community preservation funds to accomplish community preservation objectives. to me, that's something that if we did run out of money, and it looks like according to accountants, figuring that we're not going to, but say we did, that sounds to me, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but my interpretation is that if we were short, we could borrow with the intent of paying back from CPC money. Am I understanding that right?
The CPC can put something forward to borrow money as long as we pay it back, is what I think you're saying.
Right, and that's what it says on the blurb explaining what the Community Preservation Committee is.
I'd have
Borrow
to get
money from-
clarification.
I think Jen has a response.
Yep, Jen?
Oh.
Jen, you're muted.
Doesn't look like she is.
It looks like she's trying to say something to us.
You may have a problem I had with my computer a while back. Why is
Okay.
this closed?
We can jump back to that. I was,
Now, what are you saying? Borrow money from the town?
yeah, that we borrow money
Next-
from the town and we pay it back.
Oh,
Oh,
Jen's having a problem with her audio.
Borrowing's a big
Okay.
deal.
Yep, and she's saying it's a big deal. Maybe we should pull that out. We should look at that someday. We can add that onto our to-do list, that whole blurb that it says.
And we may need to include that in a document we're going to talk about later in terms of
Oh,
stuff.
okay, Jen's saying that she's writing into chat, CPA statute doesn't mean borrowing from the town, but bonding against CPA funds. Okay,
Okay.
that makes sense. Thanks, Jen.
and that's what we did with the Academy building, correct?
Right,
Okay.
right.
And the
Got it.
key
Got it. Okay, that's good. That makes sense. I'm glad I asked that.
And we'll be owing equivalent of a mortgage until 2036, according to the budget sheet.
That's right.
Right, right.
Money well spent, though.
Yeah, I wish we had the interest rate we have that they're getting for the new school building.
So when
Right.
you bond money, you can't negotiate interest rates, I guess?
Well, you negotiate it when you do the bonding. I don't know if you can go back and refinance it. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know that.
Right, I'm not sure either. Okay.
The only, Gene, the last thing I would say, since we're under financial, if I could, we need to make sure that Tony gets us the numbers so we can make a recommendation to the town council for the CPA budgets.
Right,
Since
okay,
they're in budget season, and we need to get the numbers from him so we can review them. And I think I think the estimate should be pretty high this year because of the new, I saw something from the coalition that indicated people can expect significant amount of money this year beyond past, because the housing market's been quite hot.
okay. Okay, I'll request of him what we need to work on the budget.
And remember, we went through this and we said they need to provide it to us before they ever submit the budget.
Correct,
All right.
correct. Okay, I'll do that.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on the financial
Well,
reports?
I had just assumed that our budget was formulaic based on all of these funding sources coming through. So we actually have to submit a budget request
Well,
Oh,
next year, is that right?
right, what we have to do is put so much money, we have all the income from the taxes and from the state
Uh-huh,
that comes to a lump sum.
right,
But by the CPA statute, we have to put so much into housing, open space, admin.
right, yes.
So we have to put it into the specific pots.
So
but we
that's,
also,
that's
the
what the
state,
budget is.
the state, the town's excise tax is pretty consistent That's a pretty solid number. But the
Right.
state match fluctuates a lot. And so sometimes we have to hedge that a little bit and estimate low. And then if it comes higher, there's another issue that I'll try to, well, since we're still on financial. But anyway, we still have to recommend to the town council. The finance department and town managers do not make that recommendation. We make the recommendation.
Based on those specific areas that Gina just mentioned.
They have the income side. They have the figures and they have what the state's thinking and that kind of stuff. They provide us those numbers. And we can put more than 10% in to each of the reserves if we wish.
I see, okay.
Right, we have to put, I believe, at least 10%. As Carlton said, we can put more in.
The other piece that, since we're on this, I want to make sure it's in the minutes. It's my understanding that if we have at mid-year, let's say, if we have an excess, let's say if we estimated we were going to get $500,000 from all these sources, but
Mhm.
by mid-year, we've already showing that we're going to get well north of that, let's say 600,000. We can go back by state DOR and we can rebudget that unanticipated income. We can rebudget that to the accounts as appropriate. And that's something that I asked Tony and he said, oh, no, you can't do that. I think what he said was that we only do that at the end of the year. But I don't believe, and I plan to call the Department of Revenue just to clarify it because it's confusing to me. I just wanted people to know that we can go in the mid-year and rebudget.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, and if we can, I'm sorry, did I interrupt you, Jean?
No, go ahead, Gina, and I'll ask mine after you finish.
Okay, if we could pull the exact wording from the state for that, it would be good. That way that we can show it to Tony.
I will do my best.
Okay, I know you will. You'll find it for us.
Well, the fortunate thing is we don't lose money. If we don't allocate all the money that we've been budgeted, it rolls over till the next year. So
Right.
that's we're very fortunate with that flexibility.
Okay, okay, that's good to know. Okay, Jean?
On that form, the revenue budget to actual. Now, it was projected 630,000, but the actual was 361. Is that they anticipated 630,000 in taxes, but they haven't received that yet?
Let me go back to it. Hold on.
Our projected budget for the real estate surcharge was 630,000, okay? And actual, they have only received half of that
Okay.
because we're on a quarterly taxing basis. So we've had 2 quarters. So that doesn't match up, but the estimate's very good because we know the assessed value.
Okay. That's another line explained.
Yep. And then
Okay,
and the state
How-
revenue, we estimated, last year it was estimated 110,000. We've already received 197,000.
Yeah.
So it's well in excess. No.
can I just ask what, I was just searching back from my form. Which form you were looking at again, Jean?
The revenue budget to actual.
Top
Okay.
square.
Yep.
Okay. Got it. Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Good question.
Yeah, very, very good question.
It only
Yeah.
took how long to be able to,
Yeah,
and then ask the question.
we should actually have a dummy cheat sheet on what each of these columns means that we can have handy when we look at them. Okay, if nothing else on the financial, we can jump into our old business. First thing is the grant agreement for the Central Square Congregational Church. we forwarded that information to Jennifer Burke, who I had the question for her of with a contract that Brian Pfeiffer had sent out, that it said like signed by the church. And if we needed to have something else from him, and she said that the town doesn't sign someone else's contract. The town has their own contracts that they sign. She would have it reviewed. She wrote back, she said at the time that it may have to go through the procurement process, meaning 3 quotes. We questioned it. She was telling us that on a call that we had. We questioned it for the dollar amount, and she said that Michael Dutton, as the procurement officer, may still request the 3 quotes. We did hear back from her, and she has forwarded Brian's information off to the town council and to Michael Dutton, town manager, to review it. But she did say that he's saying that best practices dictate that we get 3 quotes. So I guess we have a couple ways to do that. Jen, is your audio working okay now? No. Okay.
Can you call in, Jen? Leave your video up and call in.
Okay. So Carlton had a suggestion that he can explain, because it makes sense the way he did it, but I wouldn't be able to explain it. Or my thought is, if Jen thinks that we can get the 3 quotes quick enough, I had written back and said that we're very confident that, I don't think I used the word confident, but we could attest to the fact that Brian's quote is probably the lowest we're going to get, because he's already done a lot of the work in preparing the application for the church. So I guess, well, let's hear Carlton's suggestion first.
So if the town has to go through, it's under 10,000, I think you have to get 3 verbal quotes. And that may, well, I was hoping that either Michael or Jennifer would be here on the meeting, so that we could ask them how quickly they can get it done. But my thought is if it's going to take a while for them to do this, and we know the church needs the money stat, that we could do is say we could say that we award the church the money that we voted at the last meeting, and have the town approve it, and just send $1,000 retainer check to the church so they can sign a contract with Brian. And then what we would do is receive invoices from Brian through the church, that we would then see the amount of invoice money and then send it over to the church for payment. That's a cumbersome way to go, but that is one option. Of course, then we have to waive the rule that they spend the money first and that kind of thing, but we can do that. I think we've done it before for example, Old Bridgewater Historic Society. We waived that rule.
But if right, and I think we had done that one other time too, way back when it was a completely different issue. My question, actually, I have 2 questions for this now. The town does not pay a retainer. Okay, so that's my first thing. The town doesn't pay, according to Jennifer Burke, the town doesn't pay retainers. So either Brian takes their contract and waives the retainer fee, knowing that the town is good for their money, or the church pays the retainer, but I don't think we could reimburse for it. That I wish Jennifer Burke would say. Jennifer Olson might be able to help us.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, good.
And we can see you too.
Greetings.
Yay! Um, so I think Brian would probably waive the retainer. I think that's the easiest thing to do in that regard. And
Mhm.
you could incorporate we wrote the draft grant agreement up to make it a reimbursement-based grant agreement. So the church would, for all the work it's doing, would pay for, an invoice and then submit it with proof of payment to the CPC, and then you'd reimburse them. So you could do Brian's work the same way. We could just incorporate that into the grant agreement with the rest of the money. It's just that you're going to pull, when you pay, the reimbursement for the preservation restriction, you'll pull it from admin. Whereas when you pay for the rest of the work, you'll pull it from the project fund.
Okay, does that have to go
Does that make
back to
sense?
town? It does to me. Does that have to go back to town council because we're giving them the extra 6,500?
I probably
No, it's
doesn't
admin
hurt
money.
to have. Oh, town council. Sorry, I thought you meant the town attorney. Some towns call town attorney
Yes.
town council.
Well, we used to
Um,
call them town council, and we had to say council
I know,
with
I
an
got
ear and
confused.
I.
It's town
No,
attorney.
because it's your admin money, so you don't have
Okay.
to send your use of your admin money back to town council. You can use that admin money to support the work of the CPC.
So you have
Okay.
basically two accounts that you put into the grant agreement. One is called admin account for this and the rest for the other. Yeah. If we can do that, I would recommend that we go down that road. I just don't know what the town, I just don't know what to do.
I mean,
Right,
I would
how do-
just check with Michael since he's already weighed in on a way that he'd like to do it. I would check in with him and make sure that he has no concerns about that.
Mhm. I actually, when I responded to Jennifer Burke, I said that I forget my wording, but in other words, it suggests that it doesn't mean it has to be done. So they probably
Gina,
wouldn't
why don't you write, maybe Jennifer, Jen can send you a quick note about how that would work. And then we send it to Michael and say, is this a better way? And get his opinion so we can move this forward. I'm sorry to the church folks that are on here that we're still slow.
That's a good idea, Carlton. I
Yeah.
think.
That's a good idea. How do the others feel on that? Any comments? Concerns?
Sounds fine.
Okay. Jen, if
Sounds
you can
fine.
just,
I'm still on the first line of the other form.
Swim fast.
yeah. Yeah, Jen, if you can just write up a little blurb on how you explain that would be, and
Sure.
I'll send it off to Michael.
Yeah. My problem is on the phone. I don't know how to mute myself again. Does anybody know how to do that on the phone? I was just going to look it up.
I think it's star on Google Meet, it's *6. I don't know what it is on the phone.
Right.
I mean, on Zoom. Okay, and it's the same to unmute the *6.
Are you talking to us, Jen?
No,
Open
and I
your
don't-
mouth for a minute.
And I only know that
No.
because
You're
I
still
was
on.
not talking to you.
No,
I was
no,
not
but no,
talking to you.
I wanted to make sure your mute worked.
Oh, okay. I think it does. Here.
and I only know that because I was having trouble on a Google meeting yesterday, and I had to, the other day, the day that Verizon had all the issues, and I had to call in. So they had to tell me how to mute or unmute myself. Okay.
So the church folks, we're gonna move as quickly as we can to get this sorted out so we can get the money flowing for you guys.
Mhm. And it would mean that, if I understand right, that the church would have to pay out the $1,000 retainer.
And then invoice
no, we
us
said
and
that-
then,
Right,
Well-
we said we're going to ask Brian to waive the retainer. But because the grant is a reimbursable, you would have to pay out the $6,500 and then we would reimburse you for it.
And Jen, you can nod
Yeah.
your head. That would be after we've all signed off on the grant agreement, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I would just ask Brian to waive the retainer, which I suspect he would do. And then I would, you could pay it incrementally too. If he did, I assume he's just going to do the work and invoice you, but if he invoiced you for half the work or something, you could submit that to the CPC to pay. Whenever you get an invoice, you can pay it and then submit for reimbursement. That's the same way that the rest of the project will work.
Right. Barbara or Gordon have any questions?
No, I think I understand it, Gina.
You're better than me.
So you're going to be doing all the work with Brian, and I'm probably just going to touch base with Brian Pfeiffer, now and then by email. And so you're going to ask to waiver the $1,000 retainer. and
Correct,
then-
but the church would be signing the contract with him, not the town. If the
Okay.
town signs the contract, then we have to go through the competitive bid process.
Okay, so the church is going to sign the contract.
That's right. That's what we're gonna propose to Michael Dutton.
Okay. Now, the $6,500, are you asking the church to pay that or just submit the invoice to the town?
The award to the Congregational Church is a reimbursable award. So every bill that comes in, every invoice you pay, and then when we see that you paid it, we reimburse you.
And
Okay, so we
talk-
pay it and then we get reimbursed.
Correct.
That's in theory how it works, but I think in the past, we have done certain circumstances where organizations didn't have the money to pay up front, that they could invoice us, to send the invoice to us, and the town would then pay directly out to that person. So
Right.
we have to talk about that with Michael.
Correct.
How long is the reimbursement period once we submit a paid invoice to you? How long would that take to be reimbursed?
I'd say no more than a couple weeks.
Okay,
It should go on the warrant as soon as we would send it over and say this is legitimate. And the offices would then process that. And I think they do warrant articles, meaning money articles every week. So
Right, I think they do, but when I was saying a couple weeks, if it comes in at the start, I'm not sure the town cycle, but when I worked at the college, they process checks, say like on a Thursday. So if it came in on a Friday, your invoice, it would be a whole week before the check processed, and then it was so many days to check the checks and get it sent out.
okay,
So it could be as short as a few days, or it could be as much as a couple weeks, in theory. As I said, I'm not exactly positive what the town's payment schedule is, but I know they process checks every week.
okay. So to me, that's pretty quickly anyways.
Right,
no, it won't be 6 months, believe me.
Yeah, that's what I want to know. Would it be
And
6
if it
months?
turns into that, let us know.
right. Okay,
So am I just gonna sit tight for a few days and then Gina or Jen will be working with Brian?
No, we're going to ask you we're going to figure out how the money's going to flow. And if
Right.
it flows to you, through you to Brian, then you're going to have to sign the contract with Brian.
Okay, then I'll be in touch with Brian immediately.
Yeah, just let him
Right.
know that we're working on it.
Okay,
yeah, tell them we're working on it. We have to pass this by. Josh, can you let Jen back in? Or maybe she's back in. She just said she was in the waiting room. Yeah, we have to send off to Michael Dutton to see if he's okay with this way of handling it. And then once we hear back from him, we'll be in touch with you.
okay. I'll wait to hear back from you then.
Okay, sounds good. On
Okay.
the same thing, I kind of jumped into that. I lumped it together with the grant agreement, which is actually two different things, but I wanted to remember to say about the deed restriction. The grant agreement, Jen Golson is writing it up. She's done a draft. We've sent it off to Jennifer Burke to pass on to the town attorney for his review of it, where it has a lot of legalese in it. So once we hear back from them, we can sign it and the church can sign it too. Right, Jen?
Sorry, I'm not used to doing this. I feel like such a spaz. You can
No,
hear
you're
me,
doing
right?
great.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I even hung up on myself. I'm like, what am I doing?
We all
Yeah,
have
that
those
sounds
days.
fine. I just want to check that Jennifer does have the grant agreement. I know we talked about that after the meeting. Was I supposed to do that or did one of you do it?
You were going
Send it
to.
to her?
Yep.
Okay, let me do that now because I can't remember if I actually sent it to her. So I'll do it while
Okay.
I'm thinking of it. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
Just we need a stat review.
Yep. Anything else on the grant agreement or, uh, Jen, do we need to wait to hear from Michael Dutton? Because if the church is paying it, it's gonna change the grant agreement.
Yeah, it'll change it a little bit, but it's just basically adding in the fact that the CPC's also agreed to pay for the PR. It's not a big change. So I
It's a
think we could still send it to Jennifer and
Okay.
she could still send it to the town attorney to review.
Okay.
It's a small section at the bottom, basically, that's an adder, yeah.
Right. Maybe we should, I'm saying maybe we should say, but you're the one sending it. Maybe you should note in the email to her that depending the decision of to pay for the deed restriction, a clause may be added in for that,
Okay, yeah,
just so they're aware of it and it doesn't come back
that we would
to,
change it.
for somebody to say, well, it wasn't in the grant agreement that the town attorney reviewed.
Okay, that's good.
Okay. Anything else on the church grant agreement or deed restriction? Okay, hearing none. Moving on to the High Street Bridge Committee. Carlton, will you give us an update?
Very quick one. The state has set up a call for early February. I believe it's at 5 o'clock. No, I can't remember the time, but I think it's on the 8th of February that I know I've been invited, Steve's been invited, Eileen's on the line and she's been invited, and I think there may be a fourth person that was invited. So we'll find out. The state's going to lead the meeting and the federal government's on that call. So we'll figure out more when we get that. And I believe that'll be well before our next meeting. Did I get that right, Steve?
Yes, you did.
Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Next on the agenda is memorial building changes. We actually did that in December, so that's all set.
I just want to interject that the Historic District Commission did have a meeting with Tape Architects about the memorial building last Wednesday on the 20th. And it was a kind of interim update meeting. They did not present an application for a certificate of appropriateness, but we did examine the plans in great detail. It was a 2-hour meeting, Zoom meeting, and we did give tentative approval to the universal access ramp. That was the big question that we had, and now we'll be dealing with windows and paint colors and railing and the like. So there are really no there are no changes, I don't think, from what Carlton and Steve reported from that little subcommittee meeting that they had with various people in town regarding the memorial building. So, of course, the HTC is not concerned legally with the interior of the building. We don't have any legal jurisdiction over the interior. So that's, so we're pretty much ready to move forward with the application. I would say within the next 2 or 3 weeks, it'll be before us for the final approval.
Good, thank
We did make a few other suggestions. We wanted the steps to be granite as opposed to cement. We tried to minimize the amount of cement that's used and using natural stone, more period appropriate materials for the facade of the building and the ramp and so forth.
Okay, great, good.
Bill, quick
Mhm.
question.
Yes,
Back in, when that building was first assessed back in 2000, whatever, there were a number of physical issues that were noted in that report. The town hasn't come to you at any point to fix those issues, right? And haven't proposed them, right? They're
No.
external, a lot of external.
what issues are these?
There was a bowing in the back wall that I had seen, and there were the cupola or something up on top. There were issues. I just don't remember.
Yeah, no, none of those things were discussed.
Okay.
They were not in the plans that we saw.
Okay, so if they were going to go out and do some other things on the exterior as part of this continuing project, then you guys would have to get a certificate of
Right.
whatever.
Right,
Okay,
yeah.
just keep
those
that
were
in
not-
mind.
That's good information to have. Thanks.
I'll try to send you that report because I went back and I found a whole list of things that I forwarded to Kim Williams regarding that report and some of the features that were in need of repair
This
or
was
restoration.
after the restoration in the 90s, I assume. You said this was.
Oh, yeah, you
2000
know, this was done, the CPC paid for the report, the 4-building study report. And
I
in
see.
that 4-building study report, the memorial building, they noted a bunch of deficiencies and restoration issues.
Ooh,
So I'll get that to you.
okay, I'm glad to know about that. Thank you.
Okay. Good, thank you to both of you for that. Any questions from the rest of the committee for the public for the memorial building? Okay, hearing none, moving on to policies and procedures document. We went back through it, Carlton, Jen and I just made a few grammatical corrections and it's being sent off to we added in that as a result of the December meeting, that we would start paying for any deed restrictions from the admin account. So that was just added into the policies and procedures. And that's being sent off to Jennifer Burke to be reviewed by her, Michael Dutton, and because of the finance part, Tony Salmonte. So hopefully we hear back from them soon on that, and that'll be put to bed.
Gina, can I just interrupt for a second?
Sure.
I think unless I misunderstood or I missed it, were you going to review Carlton's changes and then get back to me to make sure that you agreed with them before
Oh,
we sent
yes,
it off?
Yes, I was. I'll do that tonight.
Okay, that's what
tomorrow.
I wrote down.
Okay,
Okay,
yeah.
great.
okay. So Carlton had made some changes. Once I review those, we'll ship it off for review by the town.
Hopefully we'll have it by next month for the committee to accept it.
Right, that would be nice. Okay, next is the administrative code change to ministerial. we had submitted that to the town council via, or the town manager, I believe in October, who thought it would be, he was going to combine it with some other change requests in November, December. I wrote to him recently because it hadn't been put forward, and he said he hadn't done it yet, and so hopefully that gets done soon too. So he had asked if it was a rush. I said technically no rush, but obviously the sooner the better, because it's another thing that we'd like to put to bed that we've had on our agenda just about
I
every
actually think it's important and very urgent to get it done so that we have some policies in place that we can work off of. I was going to ask if the committee wanted to have the chair submit a note to him that requesting that he put it on the next immediately available council meeting. But that's up to the committee.
Okay, thoughts on that for the committee?
Fine.
Yeah, no, that sounds good.
Okay. So I'll just put something together and send it to Michael and ask him to not wait for him to put together where I don't know how many other changes he has to put through, but to at least put us through. So we can get it worked into our policies and procedures.
Something to the effect the committee's quite concerned about the delay in getting this done, and can he move it forward post haste?
Okay. Okay, does the committee agree with that?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, Harry, you're awfully quiet tonight.
That's all right. I'm listening.
Oh, I know you are. I'm gonna have a question for you coming up in a little bit. Just rattle your brain. Okay, the next thing, the public forum is February 24th, our next regular scheduled meeting. We'd like to invite, as we said at the last meeting, invite all the commissions and committees that we all represent to give things coming up that would be important to them, or projects they can see in the future. Plus some other committees like disabilities or the access committee, elder affairs, and definitely invite the town council. So I ask each and every one of us to go back to our committees, and like I requested Charlie Simons, who would be the one putting together things for Park and Rec, and he's willing to go. So if you have a committee that, I know Jean for yours planning board doesn't put things into us requests, but they might have input for other things into the housing or something like that. So if you can mention it, I know you have a meeting coming up next week, if you can mention it. I think Jean either fell off her chair. There she is.
No, I keep hearing an alarm going off. And then I was seeing the lights dimming over there.
Oh, okay. I hope everything's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you can, yeah,
Makes the light go dim.
yep. Okay. So Jennifer Burke has said if we put together some type of a flyer and the information, she will post it onto, I guess there's a town, on the town webpage, a town announcement page. And she said she gets good feedback on things she puts there. And if we can try to get it out to the public, tell as many people as you know, to, that we're having it and to participate. Last year, we did it as part of the, we were putting together the 5-year plan, and we had a ton of people there, for those of you that were there. I'd like to see even half as many of those people virtually.
I
So
actually-
let's,
I actually spoke with Matt Zaylor from who's working on the McElwain project.
Mhm.
And I spoke to him because that project's going to be kind of breaking ground around April. And I was going to, I wanted to invite him to the next EPC meeting. If he could, if he's at the forum, like he might be able to give we're talking about him giving an update as to what's going to be going on with one of our projects.
Mhm.
So Matt, I've spoken to him about it, but I'll give him the official invitation.
That's great. That'll be good. Anybody else that you or any of us can think of to invite? The more the merrier. We'd like a lot of input from the
Well,
town.
we need to get a public advertisement because this really is the public. It's also the committees, but we need to get
Correct.
some stuff. And I was thinking, what's the timeline for getting it out into the public? The sooner the better. So I'm thinking that we need to get this flyer done. And I'm obviously Jen. I struggle with Jennifer Burke and Jen Goldson. So Jen Goldson, I'm
Mhm.
assuming she can put a quick flyer together, but we need to talk a little bit about content, and we need to talk a little bit about what we want to say in that flyer.
Right.
So I'm thinking just to go to the agenda for that meeting, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
I think a quick review of the goals and needs or whatever. I love the idea of highlighting one of the projects, but we really need to look forward in this meeting. And then, any kind of progress that we've made, for example, the church, those kinds of things should be, recent activities would be an item line. And then I think we need to open it up to some kind of input session. What did the public think? And I'm
Mhm.
particularly concerned about the housing elements. And so I think probably after we hear Jen's presentation tonight, we may want to have her do that or even a little bit more. And we did talk with Jennifer Burke a little bit about, said that we are trying to help the town move forward with the housing trust. And I think we really need the people in the town to know what options are out there for CPA money to be used for housing. So that could be one of the stronger focus areas of this presentation. This is all off the top of my head. I've spent a little bit of time thinking about it, but are there other areas that committee members really want us to hammer on in this meeting in terms of public input and direction? I do know one. I do have one. I thought, I know I spoke with the Hansons and they have spoken with the town and they have some interests and they're actually getting a property survey lines done. They're paying for it up front to get that done in anticipation of potentially trying to put it into some kind of agricultural or other, what do you call it, preservation or whatever. They just told me they're interested in it. And I did invite them to come to the meeting and talk to us about it at that forum. But also I told them with permission that I could talk a little bit about what they may be thinking about. They're still doing their due diligence on it.
Mhm. As far as having it counting at the public forum, I guess I would ask how comfortable they are having it out in the public, right? I mean, we're talking about it now, we're at a public meeting, but at a public forum or in the works of it. So I would just check that with them first.
I think they're very interested in doing some of this to work forward.
Right.
Maybe they can talk about their desires. They don't have to say we're doing it, but they could say, we'd like to do this, we'd like to do that.
Mhm.
But I will speak with Bob and Dave.
Okay, good.
I think I mixed them up with names.
I don't know which one's which.
I know, Ian's husband. It was almost 2 years ago now on Easter Sunday that he mentioned it at the sunrise service, that they were in the process of working on it. So they may not be shy about at least mentioning something. And
Mhm.
I mean, they were both at last the last public forum in person. And I know Ian comes to, attends a lot of the Zoom planning board meetings lately.
Mhm.
So,
Now Janet does too.
I mean, yeah, Janet, not
I was
Ian.
gonna say, I don't remember seeing Ian, but I
Mhm.
see Janet.
Yeah,
but-
Janet.
I spent some time with Bob. I spent about a half an hour with him and we had a nice chat.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I will
know-
I will check in.
Yeah, David had told me over a year ago that they were interested in it and they were talking about it. But at that point, nothing was, they were still they're talking about it personally themselves on it. Yeah.
Steve, is there anything from a historical perspective? I know you've got a lot of ideas and things, and maybe we need to have some things that seed people's thinking and get them moving forward.
Well, I think that I can pull up some information on maybe some historic and the list of some historic houses that we have. That wouldn't be a problem. I think that if anyone has any of them in mind, or if I can bring up the town hall, because that's something that we should be hearing. Like I was told that we're going to be hearing more about the town hall, but reporting the feasibility study fairly soon. That I was told that a few weeks ago, so hopefully it's going to be coming. That we'll see what's going on with that. But I can definitely put that together. Any historical reports.
And maybe you could report out on, if we have that February 8th meeting on the dam removal project, maybe there could be something update. I don't know where we're going to go with it, but mitigation seems to be an appropriate thing. So maybe there's some, maybe that would be a topic area to either you or I address. I think historically you should do it.
Okay, Jen has something to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer, if you wanted to have a consolidated PowerPoint with all these various, any images you have or any talking points you want, if you send me whatever you want to include, I'm happy to make slides up for each presenter, if that's helpful.
That'd be great.
I think that's great. I was gonna ask you if you could put together some type of a PowerPoint for it.
Okay, good.
So,
Yeah, I would just say, if you give me at least 1 week prior to the forum, just send me whatever you want. And if you have specific talking points or images, just make sure I understand like which talking points go with which images, just to make sure it's clear how you want it set up. And then I'm happy to do that.
okay,
Yeah,
and we probably want it sooner so that Jennifer Burke can get it advertised and we can get it out to the public.
Well, I
too.
just mean PowerPoint. I just mean the
Oh, for the
PowerPoint. But the
PowerPoint, okay.
flyer, yeah, the flyer I can do.
And
You
I
know,
think the ideas that we
that.
talked about just now could be leaders in the flyer. Come hear about this, come hear about that, and bring your other ideas.
Mhm.
Okay.
But from a Jen, from your perspective, the forum needs to be, you do a good process of bringing people out and facilitating. So I think the PowerPoint thing is great and people can do their individual parts. I think then, if we go back in the goals and tie everything we've done back to the goals would be a nice way to frame it. And then the going forward part, the second half of the forum, the going forward should be housing. It should be historic preservation. Eileen's on the call right now. There could be some open space. Maybe the open space committee would like to have a little time to say what their thinking is, because I know she's very interested in trails. So we could do that kind of thing and say, what do you want to have done next? We've got this amount of money. Oh, we could do a financial thing, how much money we have available for things.
Mhm.
Just thinking off the top of my head. And then we can have, at the end of it, we can have a little consolidation of what's, what the people think, a quick summary or something like that.
Mhm.
Can I ask, with the master plan work, is there anything that we could present that's, not everything is related to CPA in the master plan, but there are, I'm sure things that overlap.
You'd
And I
have
don't
to
know how
talk-
far along, I haven't kept track of how far along that is. If
Well,
there's
where
anything
it's
we could.
I can tell you where it's at. The comprehensive master plan. Oh, congratulations on that wonderful. I just read your Mansfield master plan.
Oh,
What what a beautiful piece of work.
Thank you.
Where it was left, the comprehensive master plan committee has served out its 1 year, turned into 2-year term. The chapters, the 7 chapters documenting where we are were drafted, and then, and I just sent this as an email out to, they said that we would receive the updated chapters for our information in response to our comments. We have not received that. But I do think that we should bring in, maybe Jennifer Burke can do this. She could bring in the housing, open space elements, the rec elements, historic preservation elements. We could talk to what those are to see how well they match up. I don't want to make it too long. We need to set a 90-minute time frame. But we should bring those up so we can compare and contrast to our document and theirs. So I think that we'll need to bring Jennifer Burke in, and there's a good chance that maybe she could have you speak with Judy Barrett's group, and just something to move it forward. That's a great idea.
I think it would be a good idea to talk a little bit about the application process itself. Because people have so many questions about that. I mean, obviously the town doesn't have questions, but private individuals whom we want to encourage, I think, to apply, probably find the process confusing. And of course, that we may not want to get into that. I mean, that's going to take a while. But
well, I think we could have a slide on that, with the links and that kind of thing.
Just right, where to find the info.
yeah,
Right. Because we're
Yeah, and
still in the
some general
process of updating it. Jen?
And some general things like the fact that you do it on a rolling basis and just some general procedural things.
right.
Keep it kind of high level.
And
Right.
find it,
I think
a
that's a good
slide
idea.
on what available funds, a slide and where our money's gone. I think it's going to be a fantastic opportunity to inform the town.
And I think too, where Steve had mentioned having the person from McElwain School, because I seem to see that question a lot. Where does McElwain School stand? What's going on with it? And I think that right there is a big draw to get people.
Yeah, and I know with that right there, what I've also was planning on doing was not only with he'll be speaking at the historical commission meeting as well, but when I was talking to Matt, I want to start getting maybe even like notifying like the enterprise or something, like just get word out that this project which is very visible and very notable for Bridgewater, is happening. So might be getting like the publicity. I think will start. I want to get the publicity started now, and that might tie into this.
Going along with Steve, should we plan to write a little press release that we could send out to the enterprise so we can get an article on it in the paper?
I think that would be a good idea.
I guess who gets to write it, Jen?
Jen likes to wave to us tonight.
But I think we've got enough ideas now that we can put something together that in the next week we can work with the executive committee on this, and we can, and Jen Burke, and we can get something really good going. But we don't have a lot of time.
We could also contact Jeff Fowler and put it on BTV.
Yeah, good
It'll
idea,
be-
Harry.
That's great. Yes, that's a great idea. But it'll also be recorded because it's obviously going to be a Zoom meeting.
Right, but it's also good to have like maybe like I know when John Luck on BTV, he'll have some like kind of like the weekly reports or daily reports.
Good point.
It'd be good to have that. So I know that we've had that happen with some of the events in the center of town, and that's actually brought more attention to it. So
Mhm. Right, that's a good idea to notify cable ahead of time.
And being a
Can
Zoom,
you actually get them to live stream it
Yes,
during the meeting?
they live stream the planning board, they live stream a number of the meetings, so we should be able to do that. Maybe Josh knows.
So I think I
Zoom?
can connect to Facebook Live, but I'm not sure how we can do it through Zoom as far as connecting to their cable or anything.
Josh, can you check into that? Because I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, the council meetings are live streamed too, so that would be,
Are they
I
live?
don't know how to
through
do it,
Facebook?
but yeah.
They are live. Yeah, I
Gina,
think
this
it's
is
being
Eileen.
live streamed through Facebook, which shouldn't be an issue. I can connect it at any time. But what are you guys looking for, something other than Facebook?
Yeah, so if we could possibly do it for the forum to have that live streamed.
Eileen, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just gonna suggest, I'm wondering, the one new thing that's happened in open space recently is that the acquisition of the old State Farm property. Kitty Doherty's been working on that project with the fire department, or the fire training center that's been going on, that's gonna be developed, and the land has been transferred, and I think there's some significant acreage that's going to be available for trails and open space. And Kitty's the person who's been involved in that. And Carlton, I think you were on that email also, weren't you? Have you been involved in that too? So the most recent email on the 24th went to me, Harry, Marilyn, Monica, Marilee, and Carlton.
Oh, the kitty thing, yes.
Last summer, the governor signed the Prison Fire Service Training Academy, which gifted to the Bridgewater Conservation Department the conservation easement along Summer Street and 40B Curve Street boundaries. So that might be something worth mentioning.
I think that's fantastic thinking there. This is something I did not know. Basically, when the governor signed off on the Prison Fire Service Training Academy, it was gifted to the Bridgewater Conservation Department a 10-foot, what's a CE? Conservation
Easement, yeah.
along Summer Street, 97, Article 97 lands in the 40B Curve Street boundaries. And basically, long story short, is what the National Resources Trust of Bridgewater is trying to work with corrections and other state agencies to develop a grant proposal to hire professionals to survey this trail. I'm surprised they don't come to us for some money because we could do that.
That along the river?
Where is it exactly?
No, I was wondering, is that along the river?
I think I'm not sure. I didn't see the maps that she had included didn't come through to me, so I don't know.
I know when I went with Andrew one time up to Curve Street, and he showed me that going off of Curve Street over by where the solar area,
Right.
there's a road that goes in towards the river, and I guess you must have to go quite a ways. We didn't go all the way. I don't know if you eventually have to walk the rest of the way, which I was thinking about that, Gina, in terms of our walking. And I said, I wonder if there's trails there. That would be nice.
That would be, yeah, that would be a good thing to try.
Yeah.
I would say the great thinking, and I would add that to the list of possibilities for PowerPoint slides. But that would require some input from every one of us that have thought of this, giving Jen Goldson some one-line things with whatever messages we want to have out there. Thank-
The other thing that there's certainly a lot going on at Styles and Hart.
exactly, yeah.
And Eileen, I
Yes.
saw something this week when I was looking for our walking areas, that somebody had some trails done, that they had them, they got a grant from the state. There's a trail grant. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I'll find it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I posted recently on the Historical Commission Facebook page about Styles and Hart. And I always get a lot of questions about that. And I've even had people offering to come and like help blaze trails. So I think that's a very visible, very good project that we should highlight.
Mhm.
That's a good point.
Right, things that we're working on or are strongly looking at. Styles and
Very-
Hart, the other trails that were just mentioned, Hanson's, any historic houses, anything that we can highlight like that.
Harry, does Concom have anything going that, I know you react a lot, but also you're heavily involved with a lot of trail planning with the Taunton River.
COMCOM, no, but the river, yes.
Well, is there anything from Concom perspective as a committee member that we should be highlighting?
Yeah, I'm the steward for Styles and Hart.
Okay, we've
That's-
highlighted that.
Mhm.
Big picture of Harry, right over the Styles and Hart, right in the middle, big face picture.
No, there's a lot of planning, and I plan on putting in a grant,
How many
both
miles?
from the river and from CPC, so I'm working on it.
Harry, how many
Okay.
miles is there?
How many what?
Like miles, how long with Styles and Hart?
Styles and Hart is 80 acres.
But I mean,
Right,
the
the
trail,
trails,
The trails,
A little over 2 miles, isn't it?
I'd say it's about 2 miles.
Yeah.
I mapped out one of them
Yeah,
and it
and then-
came out about.
Then we
1.5.
want to go from High Street, we want to go down to where Kitty wants to put the bridge. We got to go over that trail. It's partially in and partially not. So we got to finish that one.
And
that's short. Jean has us walking 4.5 miles now every week.
walk it twice.
in
Yeah.
90-degree weather.
Yeah,
But-
18 degrees.
I think that bridge and those concepts need to be brought out because I don't know what the Kitty's planning to do, but I do think she probably at some point would try to come to CPC for rec money, open
Mhm.
space money.
Okay.
I
Oh.
think my suggestion is that we focus on the things that are actually happening.
Mhm.
I mean, that bridge has been talked about for about 15 years. I don't know if it's any further along than has been, but I don't know. I mentioned that to somebody in town who's been involved in these things for a long time and they groaned like, oh, they're not still trying to do that bridge, are they?
Well, I did some work on it and I think I sent you I went in and found where I thought a better bridge crossing than the Town River Landing would be.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It-
So, I mean,
and go up.
I don't know. Harry may know, probably knows a lot more than me about how far along that is, but there is a lot of really current work going on, progress at Styles and Hart that I think would be more valuable to focus on than the bridge, which sounds like.
I agree, Eileen. We should focus on things that are happening now or in the near future.
Yeah, because we can get lost for hours talking about ideas and, what might happen in a year or two or something, but let's focus on, at least I'm speaking for open space, let's focus on what's happening.
Well, from the forum's perspective, I think all of those ideas that are eminent or whatever, that kind of listing in a slide would be able to trigger people's thinking. So I think, again, anything that we can send in to Jen Goldson for the slideshow.
Right. Jen, can you put together our quick flyer for us too with some of these ideas? You can
Yeah,
nod.
you mean for the, do a PowerPoint for the forum, or are you saying something earlier?
Something earlier, just a flyer like
Oh.
Jennifer Burke was saying,
A flyer? Yeah.
just something simple.
Advertisement with, come learn about
Yep.
this, come learn about that, bring your ideas.
Yeah, I can send you something and then you can add to it if you want anything else, but I'll put down what I heard tonight.
Okay,
Super.
great. Thank you.
I have a question for Harry, actually, since he's active with Concom. Does the town do very much with reclamation of ponds? We have some ponds in Bridgewater that are in really poor environmental shape. Most towns maintain their ponds very carefully, but there are a few ponds in town that are really being neglected. I don't know if they're actually on private property or if they're on public property. Who deals with things like that, Harry?
It should be, if it's a town-owned piece of property, it should be the town. But the 10 years I've been on Concom, we have never done any. We've put protection acts against certain parts, but cleaning them up and everything, no, we've never done anything.
Yeah, well, that's something we ought to think about.
Well, I think back in the 2014 open space update, we did include something to the effect of water quality and that kind of thing. And that certainly, I don't know how it fits into CPA, but you're
It
correct.
probably doesn't. It probably doesn't fit in.
Well,
Yeah,
if it's,
it seems to me, I've seen, I looked up some other towns, what other grants have been given, CPA grants, and it seems to me, I did see one where a town used it to clean up invasive aquatic species in town ponds. I know Carlton, you said some towns are not sticking with the rules, so I can't speak for
Yeah, no,
how
if I could
legal that
chime
was.
in, I think, if I could chime in, that I think that's eligible. It's a natural resource.
protection.
A lot of communities have used funds to remove invasive species and to do pond restoration work, especially on the Cape. There's a bunch of communities on the Cape. I think Eastham has a number of ponds that it did some work on, and there's others, I'm sure.
And the county bought a dredge that they could supposedly clean out ponds with.
Oh,
I know one of the things I've noticed at Carver Pond, you really can't kayak there in the summer. The foliage is so thick, the water lilies, and I guess, Harry, I have a question for you. So is that's under Concom jurisdiction? Would open space need to approach Concom about considering a project related to cleaning up the water in Carver Pond?
Yes, they should.
Okay.
We did do one at the kids' place that's on what street is it? Up by Home Depot.
Elm Street?
They did clean up a pond, but that was on private property, but they still came before us to get ideas on what to do and what chemicals to use.
Okay. Okay, that's just another thought we've had.
Is that at the Bridge Center?
That's the one, the Bridge Center.
Yeah.
The pond in there was cleaned up.
So I know the hour's moving on, or the time's moving on. Do we have enough ideas here now to actually get a solid draft?
I would think so. Yep, and Jen's nodding, yep. Okay.
You can use,
Moving on.
Gina, you can use your town report submission maybe as a kind of outline for the public forum agenda. Because
Yep, that's true. That's a good point. Yeah, what that highlights, I have to pull last year's, but I put a brief history of, a brief summary of what the CPC is and the CPA, and who our members are, what our goals are, how we receive our funding, just a history like
Oh,
that. A summary and projects we've done in the year and how much money we have, like how much money is coming in, how much money is we spent out.
Yeah.
So that's a good idea too, Bill. Very good.
Because you're going to be doing that this week.
Yeah,
I
I have to
submitted
do
mine
my,
already, so.
I promised Merrily that I wouldn't be the last one this year again.
So shall we move on to the housing trust issue? Because I think
I
that's going
would
to take quite
say,
a bit of
yep.
time. Are you sharing? Can you share? Good.
Yeah, I'm trying to share. Josh, could you give me access? It's through not my phone, my video. I guess you know that probably. Okay, great, thanks. Okay, hold on. Let me get this in presentation mode. Hold on a second.
Just while she's doing that, as you guys know, housing is a major piece, and there are lots of things going on in the housing world, and there's all sorts of stuff I've been receiving. I don't know that I've shared it out, but there is a place called the Housing Toolbox up on the state's website that can be helpful in terms of how we're going forward. What we did tell Jennifer Burke is that and I think I'm speaking for the committee, that we're very interested in making sure we can move housing forward in Bridgewater. And basically what we're doing here is trying to help the town get on top of this and try to get it. There's emergency housing. Lots of CPCs have provided emergency housing for in the COVID period and stuff. And we have no real plans for that. So the trust is where was set up so that we could transfer money to the trust where they could use it for all these good things. So that's the purpose of this. So going forward, we're trying to make this very active. And I hope everybody agrees with me.
Okay, am I on mute?
Nope,
You're
you're unmuted.
Oh, no.
You're
Okay, I
fine.
couldn't remember. Okay, all right. Great, and you can see my screen. You can just give me the thumbs up if it's coming through. Good, okay. All right, so I put together a short presentation. This is just going over kind of the basics of housing trusts. I do a lot of work for years and years. Actually, back when I first started my consulting practice in 2006, one of my very first clients was the town of Sharon. And the Sharon CPC had hired me to do a community preservation plan. And one of the first things they asked me to look into was housing trusts. It had just been enabled through state legislation that you didn't need to go through special legislation to create a housing trust. In 2005, Massachusetts adopted enabling legislation that allowed local legislative bodies by majority vote to just create a housing trust. And so after that, a lot of housing trusts were created across the state, especially in CPA communities. But a lot of the CPCs were very unsure whether they should fund these newfangled housing trusts or not. And so a lot of my clients back then started asking me, what are housing trusts supposed to do? Should we be using our CPA funds for them? So I ended up doing a bunch of research and ended up working with a lot of housing trusts over the years, and developed a specialty in housing trusts in Massachusetts in particular, and have done a number of action plans for housing trusts as well as helping them get off the ground. So that's why I have this. I helped Mass Housing Partnership years ago do 3 different guidebooks. One was, the first guidebook was on housing trusts in particular. It was the Massachusetts Municipal Affordable Housing Trust Guidebook, and that's still available on MHP's website. It's MHP, I don't know if it's .net or .org. I can get you that link if you want it. And then I wrote an operations manual for Housing Trust, also for Mass Housing Partnership. And that was the second guidebook. And then the third one I wrote was CPA and affordable housing. And that one is still, there was an older version of that, and then they hired me to basically update it. And the newer version is the one that I wrote. So through that work, I ended up getting on this like presentation circuit around the state with MHP, where I give housing trusts or communities thinking about adopting housing trusts, I would give them a presentation that's very similar to this. I customized it a little bit for you, and I took out some of the details just because I know that this is really more of an overview. I have a whole section that I did take out that someday, if you want me to, I can present that too, but it's case studies. It's results of case studies that I had done with a number of different housing trusts and how they operate and what they're spending their money on and if they have staff or not. So I took that out of this presentation, but happy to give that to you at another time. Okay, so with that as an intro, so we'll talk about just some, sorry, I forgot to update this slide. I just told you I took out the case studies, but I left it on the slide by accident. But I'll give you the rest of this, which is the basics. I'll talk about eligible activities or initiatives, a few legal considerations, and then working with trusts to really set priorities and figure out what are they going to do. If they have some money, what are they going to do with it? And then I just have some tips that I developed really through the work that I had done with communities. So just some of the basics, and just stop me. I view this as really informal. If something comes up, if I suddenly speak in jargon, you have no idea what I'm saying, or gibberish, hopefully it won't be in gibberish, just interrupt me and ask me to explain. And I really view this presentation as helping me to remember what to say, but I don't view it as sacred in that I cannot be interrupted ever. So just chime in if you have any questions. So the statute that I referred to, the enabling legislation, was adopted in 2005, and it's Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 55C. And you can look that up if you want to read it. It's pretty straightforward. It lists a bunch of powers that trusts can have. And the local legislative body, so in your case, the town council would be able to create the trust through a simple majority vote. And all it really does at its very basic level is to segregate money for housing. And I'll talk more about, well, what does that mean? What can you do with it? Where does the money come from? All of that. But that's really what a trust is. It takes money out of, other town funds, and it puts it in a special trust that's only allowed to be used for creating and preserving affordable and community housing. And I'll talk about what those definitions are and things like that, but it's very tied to the CPA definitions. And then the town needs to create a board of trustees that is then responsible to oversee the trust. And I believe you have a board. I don't know how active they've been recently. Is anybody here? I can't see everybody on the screen here, but is anybody here on that housing trust? Does anybody here sit on that housing trust?
I'm not on it, but I know there are two members that I believe go through next 2022. They don't have quorum, and Mike Dutton is the
they only
chair.
have 2 members. Oh, okay.
They're supposed to have 5, and a big point to make here is the CPC, back when it was formed, fought really hard to have a CPC member sit on that board.
And there's nobody on it now who's a CPC member?
Correct. So
Okay.
that's
Good to know.
something we need to really talk about as we move this forward.
Yeah. So there's supposed to be a board, and then the thing that's a little tricky about a trust is the statute doesn't specifically define what it means by affordable housing. So I have a slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of the different interpretations are and what's sort of a fair and reasonable interpretation. So the benefits are really that the trust has real estate powers. It has agility in you know, in communities, buying and selling property can get very cumbersome. The trust is, though, a municipal entity, so it's still subject to 30B and all of the open meeting laws and everything like that. It's a municipal entity, but it actually has powers that other boards and commissions in the community don't have. And that is, it can, mostly what it is it can buy and sell real estate. Now, sometimes a local ordinance, in your case, limits the powers of the trust. And I haven't gone and actually looked at what was voted on in Bridgewater when you created the trust. But sometimes the statute, you know, the statute lists a whole bunch of different powers that the Board of Trustees can be granted. And sometimes when the locality adopts that trust, it limits those powers. So that's something that we can look at. But typically they'll have all the power to buy and sell real estate without any further approval. So they don't need to go back to town council. Once funding is in the trust, it's the Board of Trustees' job and responsibility to spend that money. And that does include buying and selling real estate. And so that's really one of the biggest powers of the trust. And what a lot of trusts have done with that power is look for property to buy in the community. And I'm going to talk a little bit about procurement and 30B in a minute, but they'll look for property to buy. Sometimes maybe it's a condo. Other times maybe it's a single family house or a 2-family house, or maybe it's buildable land, or maybe they get transferred tax title land from the town. And then they can go ahead and either sell or lease that land. They can select a developer to develop the land or rehab the property and create an affordable deed restricted unit out of. That's one way that they do it. I'm going to talk about a bunch of ways, but that's sort of a typical thing for trusts to do. And I'll give you some examples of different things they can do, including that type of example. So because the trusts don't need further local legislative approval, so from your town council, it can actually act pretty quickly on different initiatives like that. Any questions so far? Okay, so there are a number of housing trusts in Massachusetts. This number is a little bit old. I don't have an updated one, but I would say, gosh, I probably got this number over a year ago now. So there's probably more housing trusts now, but at the time there were about 100 trusts. And this map I zoomed, and the next slide I'm going to zoom into the Bridgewater region so you can see it a little bit closer. But this just shows you, it shows you a number of things. It shows you in the diagonal hatch, it shows you what they call the MAHT, which is the kind of trust that I'm talking about. It's the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. And that's the one that's adopted by the local legislative body under MGL Chapter 44, Section 55C. It's the kind that doesn't need special legislation. But there were a bunch of other trusts before, mostly that predated that 2005 statute. And those trusts are shown in this like diamond hatch pattern. So you can see this map shows both. And then the map also shows as another layer who has CPA and at what percentage. And it's just an interesting, you know, most of the trusts that are out there also have CPA, but not all of them. But that's really the primary funding source for housing trusts across the state is CPA funds. So now I'm going to zoom in. It gets a little blurry when I zoom in, but I think it's still interesting. So here's Bridgewater, and you can see my cursor, right, when I move it? Okay, so here's Bridgewater, and then you can see that the communities directly around you, except for Easton, don't have housing trusts, but some of them have CPA. And this may be a little bit old, so I'm not sure if any of these have recently adopted CPA. Easton has a housing trust, and then you can see Carver and Plymouth, Duxbury, Kingston, Situate, Norwell. What does that say? I can't read it. I thought it said Hanover, but oh, Rockland is above it. Sorry, I was getting confused. So this is Hanover. Rockland does not have a housing trust. And so, you know, one interesting idea for you to think about, and I didn't put this in the next steps, but it just dawned on me. It may be good as part of kind of getting your trust revived to talk with some of the other trusts in the region and just start to make some connections and see how they're doing and if they have any advice for you. It's always nice to have a network. Okay, so what does the board do? The Board of Trustees really oversees the funds, and unless there's something unique about the ordinance that created the Bridgewater Trust, there should be no further approvals needed to use the funds. The board has a lot of power in that way. And the board can act really in two ways. I don't know what a percentage would be, but I think it's a pretty good split in terms of, do they act like a banker, taking in applications, kind of similar to the CPC, right? You have funding rounds and you take in applications and then you decide what to fund. A lot of the trusts approach their work like that, but a lot of other trusts, and sometimes there's hybrid situations too, but just for the sake of simplicity, some other trusts also approach that they'll come up with their own ideas and do their own programs and initiatives. And I'll talk about examples of both of those. And really, the reason you would probably initiate ideas rather than act more like a banker or a funder is that if you sat back and waited for applications, you may never get them in certain communities. Other communities, you do get them because of the market, because of the local entities or the regional entities that are doing housing work, you may get applications. But I suspect in Bridgewater, you don't get a lot of applications to the CPC for housing. You do sometimes, like McElwain was a housing project, but you don't get a lot of them. So I would think in Bridgewater, you probably would want the trust to initiate ideas and initiate programs rather than sitting back and sort of waiting for applications to come to them. But that's the kind of thing that you'd want to talk about if you do an action plan for the trust.
Jen,
Okay.
I want to ask you what you
Yeah.
exactly meant by reviving Bridgewater's housing trust. Is it?
It seems like it's dormant. It seems like there's only 2 members appointed to the board, so they don't even have a quorum. And I don't know how active it used to be, but I believe it did at least have a full board membership.
Why would people not be appointed to the housing trust board?
I don't know. I don't know locally what's going on. I don't know if anybody on the call.
Right, it's a good question for the town manager's office, Jennifer Burke.
Was it ever active as a trust board?
No.
No.
We had hoped to have the town manager and Jennifer Burke online, but obviously they're got other commitments.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think when the trust, the little I know about it, just because I've been working with Bridgewater for so long, I just happen to know a little ancillary. I remember that Lisa Sullivan had staffed the trust at one point when it was first created, and that it did have members, I think more than 2. I think it had a quorum, because I remember seeing at different trainings for housing trust, because I was doing the circuit back then, doing housing trust trainings, and she came to, at least one, maybe more than one. So I feel like it started to get off the ground, and then I'm not quite sure what happened after that, or, if they ended up having, I don't know, do they have any revenue at this point?
No,
In the
there's no
trust?
budget. They have no money.
Okay.
That's the reason we are given that they're not active, because they have no money, and so unless they have money, they can't do anything. So that's part of the stuff we need to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Like a chicken egg problem. Yeah.
Yep.
So this is just clipped. I have some things clipped from the guidebook that I wrote for MHP. And so this is the statute requires a board of trustees with at least 5 members, but there is no maximum. But I would say most boards are somewhere between 5 and 9 members is kind of the typical number. Now, we'll want to look at the ordinance that created your trust, because sometimes the ordinance is very specific about what seats are on the trust. And Carlton said he thinks that there's actually a community preservation committee seat. All of that would be a local kind of customization. The only requirement is that it includes 1 member of, well, in your case, not the select board. I believe it would be 1 member of the town council, but let me just double check that in your form of government. I know in a town form of government, it's got to be a member of the select board. But other than that, there's really no requirement. But some towns have chosen to say that they want certain types of professionals or have certain seats from other boards and commissions as permanent members of the trust. So we can look back at your ordinance and just see if it specifies any, membership requirements.
But would the local membership requirements trump the state statute requirements for the committee? Or really for any committee as far as that goes? Because I understand that there's kind of a move to reduce the size of committees because of issues with obtaining a quorum. And can town council do that if there's state statutes that indicate, for example, that there should be, if at a minimum 5 people on the housing trust?
Yeah, it's a good question. The town would not be able to override the minimum.
I didn't think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and so in addition, to just the one required rep, which I think is the town council for you, but I'll just double check that. A lot of the communities decide they want to have representatives from other boards and committees as permanent seats on the housing trust, and the Community Preservation Committee or the Planning Board or the Historic Commission, there could be all sorts of seats on that trust if you want to have kind of overlapping roles with some of those boards and committees. And then the rest of them often require that there are other professionals on the board, and they will often list, they don't get too specific about must have one attorney and one architect, just in case you can't find that discipline who's, willing and available to serve, but they'll often list, other types of professionals that would be desirable to serve.
On our website, it
Okay.
says the town manager is the ex officio, is the
Okay.
designated.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah.
Well,
After that,
he's the chair, but I don't know if the actual ordinance appointed him chair.
Is the town manager as chief executive office or his designee.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's associated as town manager.
But is that town manager the chair or just a member of the board?
A member.
Thank you.
Yeah, and he could be appointed with either with voting power or without. So I don't know which it is in Bridgewater.
Can other affordable housing initiatives be undertaken by the town beyond those approved by the Housing Trust?
Yeah, in theory you could,
Yeah.
but from a planning point of view, it probably makes sense to consolidate efforts into one board.
Yes, I would think so. Then it becomes less of an ad hoc kind of situation where there's not really any careful planning and so forth.
Right. Yeah, that's what I would advise. So the revenue, I said CPA is the most likely source of revenue in a CPA community, but there are some other things that communities have done, and sometimes you don't have access to some of these. You may not have cell tower leases that you can put funds into the trust from. I don't know of communities that have actually used their general fund to fund the trust. It's just, there's nothing stopping you necessarily other than realistically, those funds are used for other things. You could have negotiated developer fees. I don't know in terms of Bridgewater if you've had that in the past, but that can happen sometimes. Inclusionary zoning, I can't remember off the top of my head if Bridgewater has inclusionary zoning right now.
We do not.
You don't, okay.
We do
So
not.
that would be about an ordinance that if you adopted it, you could have payments in lieu of providing affordable units. And those payments in lieu could be allocated to a trust as a source of revenue. And then the town can use some revenue from tax title sales. They have to direct the treasurer to do that, but that's a possibility, and that's happened. And sometimes you can also transfer the actual tax title property, especially if it's developable or rehabable, to the trust for the trust to own and then create an affordable unit from. So those are the main ones. The other ones are a little bit more. So planning for a housing trust, this is just an example of a plan I did, gosh, 11 years ago now. I should get a newer example for the town of Westport. And I've done a number of action plans across the state for trusts. And it's really to figure out, to help the board figure out, what are we doing? How do we want to operate? What are we going to spend our funding on? How much funding do we even need? And then what are our funding sources? And the other big question it also helps to answer is, do they need staff? And if so, at what level? So let's talk about eligible initiatives. The purpose of a trust is pretty broad. It just says to create and preserve affordable housing for the benefit of low and moderate income households, but it doesn't define any of those terms. And so there's some key terms you can create and you can preserve, and they talk about low and moderate income. They don't specifically talk about support, but since the original statute was written, it has been clarified that support is now allowed. If you're using CPA funds, and if CPA funds are put into the trust can actually be used for anything the CPA funding could be used for. So there was a big, debate back in the day when this was first put out, if CPA funds are used, can you use it to support housing, like direct assistance for rental vouchers or for down payment programs for first-time home buyers? Because those types of programs don't create deed restricted, affordable housing, but they do direct assistance to households instead. And the state clarified that and said, anything, if you're using CPA funds to fund the trust, and anything the CPA funds could be used for could also be used with the trust funds. So the eligibility follows the funds into the trust. Does that make sense, the way I'm describing it? Okay.
Nope.
Okay. So the other thing is low and moderate income household income. So there's different programs that define those terms differently, and this may be something you're already familiar with, but let me just go over it because it gets very confusing. If you're talking about a 40B comprehensive permit or your subsidized housing inventory, when you're talking about 40B type housing, it refers to low and moderate income housing, but it means something different than when you're talking about CPA funded housing. The CPA statute, Community Preservation Act statute, also uses that same term, low and moderate income housing, but it actually means something different. So it's very confusing because it's the same exact term, but it means a different level of income. Unfortunately, I think that was really poorly done, in my opinion, to use the same words, but have a different definition within two different state statutes. And so the CPA is allowed to fund up to 100% housing that is affordable to households with up to the area median income, so up to 100% of the median income. And don't ask me what that is right now because I didn't pull that data, but I can get you that if you're curious.
It's something around
And then
80,000.
40B, something around 80,000, that's probably right. And then 40B, the definition is up to 80% of the area median income. So the only reason I bring this up, and then the other state definitions that are relevant are the Massachusetts Affordable Housing Trust Fund allows funding up to 110% of the area median income. So different state programs and statutes define low and moderate income housing differently. And so the question is, well, how does what does the trust mean when it uses the term? And there's been a lot of debate back and forth, and DOR's had opinions, and all sorts of housing agencies have weighed in, and kind of the general feeling, although if you ask DOR specifically, they may tell you something more strict than this, but the general feeling around most of the housing agencies is that if a state program defines, up to 100% AMI or up to 110, you could potentially justify that if there's a need for that kind of housing in your community. And you'd want to look back at your housing needs assessment as part of your housing production plan and see what your needs are for housing. But if you're using CPA funds, it's very clear that you can fund up to 100% of the area median income because of the way they changed the way CPA funds work now is if the CPA funds are put into the trust, the eligibility follows. So it's pretty safe to say that a trust could fund up to 100% of the area median income. Beyond that, some communities, Concord, Lexington, Nantucket, communities like that really can justify, based on their local housing needs, funding higher than that. But I would say for Bridgewater, if you stuck with 100% AMI and you're probably using CPA funds anyway, that's a reasonable kind of criteria to put around what this trust could fund. People following my logic there?
Yes.
Okay. So eligible initiatives. So you can do new construction, including pre-development activities. So let's say the trust acquired a property and they could do soil borings, or they could do perk tests, they could do a survey, they could do all sorts of what we call pre-development activities just to make sure they know that the property is developable and kind of what yield it could have. And then they can also sell that property or lease it. Some trusts have used a ground lease to a developer, and they'd go through a whole Chapter 30B procurement to try to find a developer, and they could create housing in that way. The trust is not a developer, so the trust would not build anything. The trust would hire developers to do that work for them. And so that's a distinction I want to make. Because the trust is bound by 30B and all the state's procurement laws, it makes no sense for the trust to actually develop anything. It's not their experience, their expertise anyway. So a trust would do the same thing other towns have done, whether or not they have a trust, is if they have a piece of property, they put out a request for proposals for what they want to see. So maybe they want to see a habitat type project, creating a duplex or some such thing like that. If they have tax title land that the town transferred into the trust, they could put out an RFP looking for a nonprofit mission-based developer to develop a duplex. And Habitat or some other smaller organization like that would put in a proposal, and then the trust would select them and either transfer the land to them or dispose of the land through a ground lease. So that's one way you could do new construction. You can also do rehab and reuse. So the town of Eastham has done a lot of this, where they've bought up 2-family or condos or single-family houses using trust funds, and they actually keep those properties. Through a procurement process, they do a rehab on the properties to bring everything up to code, and then they rent them out to eligible households. They go through a lottery process. They actually hire a nonprofit to manage this program for them, and the nonprofit also manages the properties as well as does the tenant screenings and does all the rehab. So that's another thing they could do. And that actually creates, because you put a deed restriction on those units. So those are units that then can count if they're for 80% AMI or under, and the lottery's done properly and everything. Those units could count towards your subsidized housing inventory. And that's the same thing with conversion of market rate. So you can purchase and rehab. It's very similar to the above, rehab and reuse of existing building. You can do a purchase and rehab program. The town of Norfolk has a very successful purchase and rehab program. They actually sell the properties. Unlike Eastham, they don't hold it and rent the property. They actually buy the property. They're mostly smaller single-family homes. This is in Norfolk. They rehab it, bring it up to code, and then they sell it with affordable deed restriction in perpetuity to an eligible first-time home buyer. And those units are then counted on the subsidized housing inventory. And then the other thing to do is a first-time homebuyer program, which is basically saying, we have this program we're running. You'd probably hire a nonprofit or some other entity to run the program for the trust. We have this program we're running. We're going to give out, an X amount of dollars to property owners who are income eligible, who are on our wait list, and through a lottery, the wait list is ordered. And we're going to give out, could be $100,000, could be $50,000. It's a significant amount of money to write down the cost of a market rate home so that a first-time home buyer could actually afford it. But then that household goes out and finds a home on the market that's within a certain price range. You know, you don't want to subsidize a luxury, $1 million home, but you have some kind of cap on the sales price. And there's lots of programs like that. If you're interested in learning more, I'm just giving you kind of a high level description here, but that's another kind of program a trust could fund, I would say. But I would not recommend a trust actually run any of these programs by themselves. So these are some examples of Create. There's one in Andover. There's something in Sudbury. I think this was actually tax title property. And then there's one in Carlisle. And this was a private development. And the trust funded some of the pre-development work. And there's lots of funding, other funding sources for Benfield Farms as well that went into the mix. So the trust funds are usually just one small part of a larger development like this. But for a development like this one in Sudbury, they actually owned the property and selected a developer to then do these duplex. They selected Habitat for Humanity. And then for this one, I'm not sure of the details of this Andover one, but they used the funds to actually develop it into a home ownership opportunity. So it's a single family house. Okay, so other eligible niches, the word preservation sometimes gets very confused. Sometimes people think that it means to, like in historic preservation, you might physically improve a property. That's not what it means in this framework. What it means is to preserve the affordability of a unit. So, and I don't know that there's an issue that there are any units in Bridgewater that are at risk of expiring. The affordability restrictions expire depending on the subsidy that was used. They were often 30 or 50-year terms, and a lot of them have been coming up in recent years and expiring and being lost to the market. I could look through your housing production plan and tell you if that's the case, if there are any issues, but you can use trust funds to basically save those units so that they remain affordable. So support are things like I mentioned before. You could do rental assistance program. You'd probably contract with a nonprofit or even the housing authority if they're already managing Section 8 or housing choice vouchers. You could add to that and do a local voucher to offer more rent assistance. You could also do like down payment assistance for homeowners or security deposits. And there are other forms, but it would be a program that you'd run. It's not like a home buyer would come to the trust saying, I need help buying a house. You'd establish an actual program that would be run by a nonprofit or the housing authority or an entity that has capacity to do that. Okay, so some legal considerations. I'm going through these pretty quickly, so just stop me if you have any questions. But because the trust is a municipal entity, just like the CPC is, it just happens to have different powers and responsibilities, it's still subject to open meeting law, conflict of interest law, and the procurement laws. Now, the one exception that is tied to the CPA funds that you may already know about is if you're using CPA funds, including through the trust, to acquire real property, you don't actually, it exempts you from 30B. So in other situations where a municipality is buying property, you actually have to put a notice in the central registry and you have to say, we're looking for property to put a school on and it has to be X, acres and it has to have these characteristics and near a highway or whatever it is. And then you have to solicit proposals. But you don't have to do that with CPA funds. That's why you're able to purchase things like that Broad Street property or other properties that the CPA has been instrumental in purchasing. So the trust has that same capacity to buy property without basically putting out an RFP looking for properties. Is it making sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. All right, so some traps. And I think, Bridgewater may have fallen into some of these and they're very common. And when I first started out, this is what I saw. I saw a lot of trusts just starting out and kind of floundering, not quite knowing what to do. And they had a lack of a common and clear purpose. inadequate community engagement and participation. People didn't even know they had a housing trust in town and weren't sure what the housing trust was even supposed to do. Voices that are essential but not included. So who's sitting on that trust, and are, you know, the different entities in the community represented that should be. And that's only something the locality can decide, but making sure that the trust board is adequately representative of the community. People just getting frustrated because there's lack of consensus. And then if there's just a lot of bureaucracy around how you operate, I saw that people could get very frustrated for, you know, small impacts. They had to go through such ordeals to get things done. So trying to think of how to streamline things and really focus your energy. So I also view this trust, this board of trustees, as a team. You know, they're doing something that's hard. It's not well defined. You know, the CPC is different because, you know, you have this bucket of money. You don't have to beg and borrow for the money. It comes to you every year and you get a budget and you get applicants. And I'm not saying your job's easy, but it's a little bit more defined. A trust is a more creative entity potentially because they're really trying to figure out, what are they doing? Why are they here? Who are we? What's our purpose in this community? How are we going to do this? How are we going to approach it? You know, who does what on our board? What are our different roles? And then it's really just a cycle. You have to keep asking yourself the same thing, you know, every few years. So this is why I advocate for creating an action plan to really get on the same page and involve community members to figure out what are the highest priorities here for this trust to do and how should they be operating. And so another tip is to figure out what actually matters in this community. What are your housing needs? What are the things that matter the most to help Bridgewater in their housing needs? And then, you know, look at, this is your housing production plan, your most recent one, but you'd also want to look at your master plan and any other planning documents that can help inform the work of the trust. And then figuring out, what do you mean by a good project? And so there's, you know, kind of best practices around managing a grant. You know, you look for projects that have a low cost per unit, as an example. That might be something important to kind of create as a policy of the trust. Or maybe they're looking to leverage funds. And so depending on what kind of criteria the trust sets for what it thinks is a good project, that will dictate the kind of projects that it ends up funding. So if you think leveraging other public and private funds is a very important thing, then you're likely to fund more of a developer project like that Benfield Farms in Carlisle that's putting together a bunch of different sources and the trust is just one source. But if you think that, you know, creating small, you know, mission-based, through volunteer, you know, projects, duplexes, things like that, infill projects is more important, and you don't mind if it's 100% trust funded, then that would point to a different kind of project. That would point to more of a using tax title land to find a group like Habitat to create a duplex or a single family. And maybe you use all trust funds to fund that or donate the land to the cause. And so thinking about what do you mean by a good project, what are you really trying to do, it's not an easy answer, even though there's definitely some best practices out there. It takes some work to figure that out. And then once you get going, really showcasing success, I found that it helped when trusts kind of tooted their own horn, saying, we've done this, we've, you know, created this housing, we've used the funds in this way, and just to kind of stay in the public eye. And so in terms of the trust and its relationship to Community Preservation Act funds, typically the way it works is the trust is an applicant for CPA funds, and they write an application and they say, this is our plan, this is what we want to use the funds for. We're going to ask for 1 year's worth of funding so that we can fund a homeownership program, or so that we can you know, create development on tax title property, or so that we can solicit a developer and, you know, contribute to a larger project. And so there's all sorts of things they can say in that application, but the way they get the funding typically is they ask the CPC and they say, these are the kinds of things that we want to do. This is our action plan. We've gone through this process to figure out what are the priorities, how can we help Bridgewater attain its housing goals, and this is how much money we think we need to support that work over the next year. And then the following year, they'd come back and ask for funding through that application. Now, that's one way. And that's the most common way. But I just want to put out there that once a trust is trustworthy and gets going, the relationship sometimes evolves to the trust becoming the housing arm of the CPA funds, so that it ends up not having to ask for funds every year. Instead, the CPA allocates as part of its regular spring budgeting a portion. It could be the 10% requirement. It could be something higher than that. But it would allocate those funds to the trust every year, so the trust has a regular and predictable revenue stream. But I would say that I typically recommend that situation for trusts who've been around a while and who have kind of proven that they've got their act together, they know what their priorities are, and they have shown that they can kind of function as a group and get things done. So I would say that in the beginning years that the trust would want to really do the action plan and tell the CPC rather, this is what we plan to do with the funds. Then the CPA funds can be allocated to the trust. The trust can go ahead and do what it says it's going to do and show some proven success. Is it making sense? I hate these presentations where I'm just talking and talking and talking. So if, you know, if I'm boring you guys, I only have like 2 slides left.
Yeah.
All right, so next steps, this is what I recommend. And to some extent, I guess you could say this is self-serving because I do this work, but you know, if you can find another consultant and want to hire them, you know, I say go for it, but I would love to help you with this work. Creating an action plan, I think is important because it helps get everyone on the same page. First, you've got to create, you know, fill the board up with appointees. And then I would say create the action plan with the new board of trustees. And through a broader community process, you know, I think the trust should talk to different boards and commissions as well as the general public around what kinds of things make sense for this trust to focus on in the next 3 to 5 years. And then they would go and request funds through an application process. So maybe next year they'd come to you after they do their action plan. And then I would also consider some staffing options. And Jennifer's not on the call, but I suspect she would say that they don't have the capacity to staff the trust. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Sometimes the trusts are staffed through the planning department. Other times the trust pays for their own staff, and they can do that out of the trust funds or through CPA funds as well. And other times they hire a consultant to help staff them. So there's different options for that.
So, Jennifer, I
it.
do have a question. Go
Mhm.
back to the last slide, please. Back
Carlton, go ahead.
one. Does the action plan, is one of the actions in an action plan is to produce a policy and procedures manual? Or
You
does that
could.
precede?
Some trusts have done that. When I worked with, not Westport, it was Westford. When I worked with Westford, they created like they may not have called it policy and procedures, but it was essentially the same thing where they figure out exactly how they're going to,
Operate.
you know, operate. Yeah. Yeah. So that can absolutely be part of it.
Okay, thanks.
Jennifer, what is the relationship between the Mass Housing Trust and then these municipal housing trusts? Can municipal housing trusts receive funds from the Mass Housing Trust?
No, the Mass Housing Trust really goes through DHCD to fund developments, you know, by private developers. Yeah.
What would be the kind of typical budget for, say, towns in southeastern Massachusetts that are kind of comparable to Bridgewater? I'm not talking about Duxbury or Marshfield,
Sure.
those areas. What kind of typical budget do these housing trusts have? And I know they would fluctuate depending on whatever the initiatives are being undertaken year by year, but.
Right. Yeah. You know, it's hard for me to give a specific budget, but what I would say is often it's the 10% of CPA funds. That's a starting place. And I don't recall offhand what your 10% would be each year. Carlton, you probably have it because you guys just talked about the finance report.
300 and some $1,000 probably.
Well, yeah, I'd have to look a little bit further.
Yeah,
Our
because it's
tax-
been collected, so the reserve is higher than your annual at this point. Yeah, so if it's around 300,000, I would say that that's a starting place. I think that depending on what the trust wants to do, they may need more money each year. It really depends on what they're trying to fund. It's different if you have an initiative where you're getting tax title land transferred from the town into the trust for free, and then you're selecting a developer. You may pay a Habitat like another 50,000 or something to help support the project, but essentially it's a pretty inexpensive way because you're essentially giving the land to Habitat in return for the public benefit of creating the housing. So there's not a lot of money that has to transfer. So that would be sort of one of the less expensive type of projects. If you were going to do a home buyer program, though, I would say that's one of the more expensive per unit. So if you wanted to fund like 3 or 4 home buyers a year, you'd have to look at the gap of what an affordable price is based on compared to I'd just look at your median sales price. And I don't know what the gap is offhand, but that's typically what the subsidy would be to make a median, sales price affordable to an 80% AMI or 100% AMI. We could run both those numbers, but if I had to guess, I would say it might be like 100,000 or so per unit. And that's a wild guess. I don't know what your market is right now, but if you're thinking 100,000 a unit and you want to fund 4 home buyers, that's $400,000. So I would say somewhere between, maybe 300 and $500,000 is probably reasonable each year, but it really is also just tied back to what are they trying to do with the funding and how much would it cost to do it.
I'm stymied to understand why we have this housing trust already in place, but it's not active unless the town feels that we've met our threshold of affordable housing, which is a small number. It's like 10% or something like that. And I understand that we are up to 12 or 13%. Which is still a pretty small number when you think about it, when you think about the costs of housing in Bridgewater, which is of course ridiculous. But I just can't understand. I understand why a place like Carlisle and Sudbury, where the housing costs are astronomical, I imagine it's difficult to meet that 10% threshold. And by the way, the 10% threshold for affordable housing in a town, what are the consequences if a town doesn't provide 10% affordable housing? Are there any ramifications, or I'm just wondering about that. I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, you would be the town, and you have been in this position where you'd be subject to comprehensive permits under 40B, and the town would have very little ability to deny those projects. And I think you have had a few 40Bs in the past before you got to the 10%, but that's just going on very old memories. So,
Yeah, you're
but
probably
that's
We went above it, but we are at risk to going below it if we don't do inclusive zoning and that kind of stuff.
okay, because when the 2020 census comes out,
Yep.
the unit count will change.
Yeah, I could believe that.
Lots of things may change.
Yeah.
Okay, on the funding of the housing trust, Harry, do you remember, this is where I'm going to rack your brain. Way back when, I think a number of years ago, I think it may have been when you were chair, but I'm not positive. Either you or Melissa, I know it wasn't me, and I think it was after my release time, that the CPC recommended like 450,000 to be transferred from CPC funds into the housing trust. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. And first of all, they wanted all the money and we said no.
Okay, do you remember because money never went in that we can see that it was transferred? And it seems to me when we were talking about McElwain, somebody had commented that we never spend any housing trust money, housing money. So I asked Jennifer Burke the other day when we were talking to her if she knew anything about it. She was gonna try to look it up, but it was before her time. Do you know if that money, if it ever went to the council to transfer, if it, like, what happened to our recommendation?
Hmm. I am not sure.
Do you recall?
I know we brought it down to the 400. And I don't know if it went to the council or not.
Okay. And
I
that's
think
what we're-
it did. I think it did, but then they never did anything with the meetings. They had a meeting and then they postponed the rest of them, and it just seemed to
Okay.
fall apart after that.
Okay. Okay. So maybe we can find out why the council never did anything with it. Or if the money was at one point switched out, maybe we're just not looking back far enough into the financial things that we're looking at and far enough
I don't-
back to see it.
I don't think it was ever completed, and I wouldn't spend a lot more time on it.
Yeah,
I think what we really need to do here is to really figure out what the town manager, we need to find out where the town manager wants to go with the housing trust. So we need to have,
Right.
some
I had
conversations with-
sent him a. Okay, everybody's like really, the sound on my connection is,
well, I
But
think
yeah.
it's getting very late. I think Jennifer gave a wonderful presentation that I'll take another 2 days to even understand and digest. But it's not that we didn't need to have this. It's really important. It's an incredibly complex process that has to have some really dedicated people to go forward. And I do
Mhm.
believe the comprehensive master plan, at least one, I had suggested that the housing trust be revitalized as one of the actions, but I don't know what's going to happen. So I think we need to have a conversation with town manager and Jennifer Burke at the executive.
right. I had
level.
invited him to, I sent him a separate email. Josh notifies some of the meetings anyways, and I sent him an invitation too.
Well, I'm saying that they're not on the tee, so we need to have a conversation as the chair, you need to have, and
Right.
I, as vice chair, need to have a conversation to
Okay,
figure out where we're going so we can figure out the next steps. Because I hear Jen saying she would be more than happy to support the town with developing, if you want to call it an action plan for the trust. We can fund that kind of stuff out of our, maybe out of our, well, I'm not sure. The town might have to apply for money, but we can do that as a help to the town, but we shouldn't be doing it without knowing what the town, if the town really wants to have this.
Exactly, yes. Because Jen's presentation was wonderful. I thought it was fascinating. She came up with some great ideas for ensuring affordable housing, things that I'd never thought of. I thought it was really very informative.
Mhm.
Jean?
Could I just ask, can it be like a revolving thing at all where if the housing trust bought or, sold the piece and then the money comes back, is that? Yeah, it can.
Yeah. So the short answer is yes, but the trust just the math doesn't work for it to be sustainable for a long term, because when they sell it for a discounted price because it's sold for affordable housing. And usually if you're talking about like buying an existing property, like an existing house, for example, and rehabbing it and then selling it. So there's two things. One, the sales price is lower than they bought it for because it needs to be affordable. But the second thing is they put money into the rehab. So they put money into that. So any sales proceeds does go back into the trust. It's just it's going to be less than they put out, if that makes sense. So it's not sustainable over the long term. They'd still need to replenish the funds.
Yeah, I mean, what I was thinking too is the CPC annually puts the money in, but then some of it can come back. It can
Yeah.
stay building. And it would be nice too if there's town, if the town has taken properties for taxes or something, that they've got
Yeah.
in your books that they're not getting anything on. And you renovate those,
Mhm.
you get them off the books now.
This could be something, Jean, that you would ask me for planning board things for CPC that could be brought up when they ask for liaison reports or other reports. That's something that you could just bring up that we're looking at the housing trust. Right. I think that Jen's presentation was outstanding. I learned more about housing trust than I ever knew in my life. Like lots more.
I'm,
I thought it
when-
was
when-
very,
when this
very
meeting
good,
gets
and I
posted-
thank you for it.
When this meeting gets posted up onto the YouTube site, Josh, can you let us know? Because I want to have the town manager and Jennifer Burke actually hear the presentation. And that's the only way I can figure out to have them get educated. I do think I know now why it didn't really go, because there was no real guidance, there was no action plan. Nobody had any idea about what it should become, and therefore it just atrophied.
So
That's my-
they're in need of a consultant like Jen.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we need to try to figure out some housing for people that you can loan money to people in COVID times. That, you know, there's lots of towns have done that. So let's move. It's getting really late, so let's move on. But I think we've got a nugget starting here. Thank you.
Okay, and that was one last thing on that, Carlton. That was one of the things that at the start of the pandemic that Michael Dutton had told me they were looking at was possible rental assistance for people in the they couldn't have, affected by the pandemic. But then that idea, they found they didn't need it, so that went out. But that would have been a good housing trust thing.
Yep.
Yep. But
Let's move on.
okay, moving on, liaison reports. I'll start off for Park and Rec. We had awarded money for fencing at Legion Field around the playground and dugouts and such. Dugouts and all that was done. Part of the playground was held off because the highway department had to do some work before the fencing could go up to work to help Charlie. That has been done by the highway department. They should be, well, as of last week, they should have been done soon. So if they're not done with the fencing, it will be like any day now. So that'll be done, right? And it's coming in just at the amount that they had asked for. I'll jump down. It's under new business, but you saw the memo that Michael Dutton had sent to us about possible future projects, and one of them is requesting money to work on the pickleball courts. The town had given $20,000 as startup money from capital planning, but for more work on the courts, Park and Rec will be coming to CPC looking for money to help fund the pickleball courts. So, any other liaison reports?
I don't have anything.
Okay, we heard already. Yeah, we heard about the memorial building already.
Well,
Okay.
you want all the Broad Street?
Oh,
Wednesday, they'll
Yeah, well, you can tell us quickly about Broad Street.
Broad Street. They'll be back this Wednesday, so come and join us. And then also the Perkins property, they're planning on development of that. Oh God, how many apartments?
Was that the 172?
Yes, that's what it was. I was gonna go back and find that. Um,
Then there's the other Broad Street project.
well, there's the one at Friendly's and the bowling alley. There's that one. That's the one that will come
Right.
Wednesday. And then the other one, I
Mhm.
and they're gonna come to kind of talk to us about it, the one at the Perkins Foundry.
Mhm.
And then there's also Bogarts is gonna be developed.
Mhm.
Um,
But now, how many apartments at the Perkins Foundry one?
Perkins Foundry,
That was close to 100 too, wasn't it?
yeah,
Ooh,
They'll probably have to come before the historical commission because that's on the it's in the Macris database. Not it's in the industrial corridor, and it's also two. I think two of the buildings are actually have their own Macris data.
Designation, right?
Perkins.
At Perkins Foundry, Steve?
Perkins is
Yep.
partly central business district and partly,
Steve at the Foundry?
Yes. Yeah, I think
Uh,
the,
do-
the main building, like the main office has its own, it's in the database. The actual whole structure is in the transportation and in industrial corridor, which is a cultural area.
So that means they basically have to come to the historical commission for a demolition permit or to make an assessment as to whether or not they should be taken down, right?
Yes.
And I have mentioned that to the developers, and I mentioned that at the planning board meeting, that
Yeah, they're
it's really
actually-
critical.
Gene, have real traffic studies been conducted for the Broad Street apartment complex? I mean, that's the most congested area in the town of Bridgewater.
yeah, we had talked about that last week because, or the last time they were there. And they have done traffic studies because we were talking about doing the right turn only, which they didn't think was a good idea. I mean, of course, nobody follows the right turn only anyway.
I do.
I do.
I
Well,
do.
I know, but there's plenty who don't. I mean, even here at the pediatrician's office, I see them coming over the thing so that they can turn left, which it's made so that you can't, you're not supposed to be able to.
Well,
Will
and
all
they've
the,
got, they've
Mhm.
got,
will
got-
all the traffic from that apartment building have to exit onto Broad Street? Or will
Yep.
there be some kind of back route?
No, there's no way out the back.
I cannot imagine the congestion in Bridgewater. with-
I can't either,
it's-
Bill, and to
I
add
can't-
to that, the proposed buildings.
They've
Yeah,
got
the
four-
proposed buildings at the Perkins Foundry, right at the railroad tracks,
Right, right.
They-
There-
basically at the railroad tracks, to add that much, another
Yeah.
100 apartments, it's crazy.
Yeah,
the Broad Street project has 4 entrance egresses. And I think that's a really serious problem. They need to have a single point of entry at a light and then they can circulate cars behind it. Otherwise, it's going to be a nightmare. The traffic study was done, but the counts mean one thing.
Mhm.
The timing and the entrance points are different. So I think I made that point to the planning board. Hopefully they heard. The other piece I would
And if-
ask, the other piece that I would ask
When
Gene,
are-
may I finish, please? The other thing that I would ask Gene is that the
Yep, go ahead.
parking lot across the street, please push hard for it to be, if they're going to get the bonus points for it, incentives, please make sure that whatever they do there, they provide electricity and they provide outlets and they provide a pocket park in there. That way we actually really do improve the recreation in that area. And the public safety issues crossing that street is, I
I
brought up
know.
also.
yeah.
Mhm.
The planner really ought to do a separate traffic study. It shouldn't be done just by the developer. It should be done by the town because that kind of data can be skewed. particularly right now when the college is not really in session. The numbers would, and it's still congested. On a regular day, Broad Street is unbelievably congested. So you couple that with the commuters who are going to be coming back in full force to the college in the fall, plus then all these apartment buildings and these.
Jean, do you know if they've submitted for the Broad Street project?
For which one?
Right, do you know, Jean, if they've, for the Broad Street project, if they've resubmitted a new traffic study? One of the issues that I had, I had included it in my letter to the personal letter to the planning board, was that the traffic study was poorly done. Streets were misnamed. They were saying that Broad Street and, or is it Bedford Street connected when they were talking about Broad Street and Summer Street, when they were talking about Plymouth Street. They had, I think, at the center of town by the Savings Bank, they didn't mention the separate light for the left turn. So the traffic study was, in my opinion, poorly done. It never should have been submitted the way it was submitted with the
Yeah.
errors in it.
Good point.
I'll have to check.
Okay, and how many apartments at Bogart's? 4? Did I hear right?
It's 5. I just saw something, it's
5.
5. It's, and that Bogart's building has been totally refurbished on the inside. I've heard that
Has
they've
it?
done a very nice job.
And a restaurant on the first floor of some nature.
Well, that's good. We need restaurants.
Yep, a restaurant would be good. They used to have, when Paula Latola and her sister used to have a restaurant downstairs. It was
Oh,
very
yeah.
good.
It was, yes.
Okay, any other liaison reports? Who said yes? The sound on my thing is slurring everybody. So somebody just said yes for a committee report.
There's a
No.
restaurant right next to Bogart's.
Okay,
There is.
Yeah.
Good
Yes,
one.
I've been in
owned by
there.
my daughter.
Yes.
Summer Street
maybe
Cafe is my daughter.
Maybe they'll draw even more people to her restaurant.
oh, what about, Harry, what about Summer Street Cafe? I'm sorry.
That's my daughter.
Right,
So
I know that.
that's
Very
something
nice
else.
girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, she does a
And-
nice job.
There's a Mexican restaurant going in Bogart's. Where I'm right next door, I know the
Oh,
owner.
okay, so it's not conflicting with what
No.
the cafe is.
Jen mentioned the other day, she kind of is changing her mind.
Oh, doesn't like the Mexican anymore?
Still waiting for the Brazilian restaurant to open up.
Okay.
I hear you.
Well, that's
Yeah,
good.
well, the
at least
Brazilian
it's
would do that.
Yeah.
Right,
Can-
at
can-
least
can
it's a
we go to
different
the-
type of
can-
restaurant.
Yeah, can we move on? Because it is really getting late.
We're working on it, Carlton. We're getting there. Okay, next, if there's no more liaison reports, we already talked under new business. We already talked about administrative budgets and pickleball courts. We have the bill from the coalition for our dues, and it's for $2,875. We do have the money. We actually budgeted $3,000 for it. So we just
Motion
need
to
a
pay the bill.
motion.
Motion to pay the bill.
Second.
Again,
Okay, Josh, roll call.
Gina? Am I coming through?
Yes.
Carlton?
Yo,
Steve?
Yes.
Harry?
Yes.
Jean?
yes,
Bill?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion was approved.
Okay, sounds good. Any other new business?
just a reminder that everybody needs to take their ethics exam.
Yeah,
Oh.
I was gonna do it tonight after the meeting, but I think I'm not going to. I'll do it tomorrow.
I know the town clerk took it today.
Does that have to
That's
be
good.
done annually?
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
Hey, but you can get two birds
Okay.
with one stone.
So just in closing, if there's, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting people. As I said, the sound all of a sudden on my connection has gotten so bad and I start to say something and then I hear somebody else. So if I'm interrupting someone, I completely apologize. If there's no other new business, I'd just like to, in closing, remind people if they have thoughts or things for the public forum to send them off to Jen and just CC me on it. And she'll put together, like she said, the pictures or whatever for the PowerPoint, or anything you can think of for the flyer that she's gonna put together. And other than that, I'd just like to thank everybody for a good meeting, Jen for a wonderful presentation. And everybody for being here and good participation.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
So
Yes.
moved.
Second.
Okay,
Carlton.
second.
Tina,
Okay,
Carlton.
roll call.
Carlton,
Yay.
Bill,
Yes.
Oh, did you call me? Yes.
Jean,
Yes.
Yes.
Harry,
Yes.
Steve.
Yes.
Harry.
Thank you. The motion was approved. The
Yeah.
meeting is adjourned.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Have a nice night.
See you soon. Lots of work next 4 weeks. Bye-bye.
Yep, bye.